Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Post Political Podcast. I'm the host, Derek Britton. Thank you all for joining me on the last podcast of the season. Season 1 is coming to a close. We're going to be back here at the end of July, early August timeframe. We'll be starting up with brand new guests, a couple of new things hopefully thrown in. And be sure to stay tuned on the social media because there will be some stuff popping up, maybe a forum here or there or something. But the weekly podcast show will be stopping tonight for season 1, and we'll be taking a summer break to hang out with family and do some stuff that I do as hobbies and stuff. So thank you all again for joining me on the last episode of the season. Let's start up with the promos. First up, we have the Vermin Supreme Institute. Our purpose is to inspire social evolution through the disruption of authoritarianism, to promote compassionate activism, and to spread the knowledge of redacted history. Through the use of humor, direct action, and mutual aid, we uplift the disaffected, the disenfranchised, and the disempowered. And the last time, I'll probably announce this, Love and Action fundraiser went great. We have a few more things in the pipeline for the Vermin Supreme Institute, so stay tuned. We're going to be doing some of the local community fridges and things like that. We'll be putting up a bunch of resources on the website, so stay tuned for the Vermin Supreme Institute updates. Next up, we have the Be Gay Do Crime Trans Resource Network of Louisiana promo. So today and tomorrow are the last days to purchase one of these pieces of merchandise. So either the shirt or the hats, 100% of the proceeds go directly to the Trans Resource Network of Louisiana, and they're helping trans and gender nonconforming folks down in New Orleans. If you want to donate directly, you can go to the PayPal right here, and you can continue to do that, obviously, after the promo is ended. But the shirts and the hats will only be on the shop for another 2 days, so make sure you get your orders in. And last up, we have the Bridge Kids Give Back fundraiser. So again, last 2 days, we're going to be doing these for the end of season 1. So you can get a tote bag or one of the shirts, or you can donate directly. Again, right at the bottom is the link. So last 2 days to get your merchandise. Bridge Kids Give Back is a group committed to feeding, clothing, and uplifting one homeless and unhoused community at a time. And they do amazing stuff in Massachusetts. Please look them up. Go on their Facebook and check them out as well. All right. So we have Aaron Hamlin. So Aaron Hamlin is the executive director and co-founder of the Center for Election Science, and voting systems expert. We're going to be going through the pros and cons of approval voting, kind of how it compares to ranked choice voting, and then the recent approval voting election in St. Louis. So let's bring in Aaron. How you doing?
Hi, Eric. Thanks. Doing well.
Yeah, I'm super happy to have you. Like I said, I said in the pre-show, I'm very interested in approval voting. I know more about ranked choice voting just because I happen to work on that campaign in Massachusetts. But yeah, I'm very excited to learn more. And I kind of want to start off with kind of getting your, journey into starting the Center for Election Science and kind of how you got there and, what led to you co-founding that.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people who get interested in voting methods in general, they have kind of an odd experience. And I don't know that mine was too dissimilar from that. So when I was in graduate school, it was during the 2008 election, I was noticing that a lot of my friends and a student group that I was in, they were talking about voting for people who didn't really mesh with their ideas. And so we were all out to dinner one day and we were all talking about this. And I was listening and hearing about how all my friends were voting for candidates who I knew didn't agree with the political causes that they cared about, particularly given we were all in this particular student group that cared about a particular reform, and they were voting for candidates who were actually against that reform and weren't supporting the ones who were for it. And so that just seemed odd to me.
Right.
And as a consequence, I was kind of a bit disheveled, and so I thought what's going on? Why are they voting against their interests so explicitly? And they mentioned I don't want to waste my vote. We should do some kind of incrementalist approach with the candidates who don't actually support the reform that we like. And so I was a bit disgruntled, and so I thought is something going on with my friends and like, or something else going on. And it was at that point that I began to look at voting methods as a source for why people were voting in a peculiar way and why certain ideas weren't getting out there in a way that they should when they're popular ideas.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I've seen a lot of it as well. Like I have plenty of friends that voted in this last election for candidates they knew didn't support, and not even at the national, I mean, at the national level, especially, but even at some of the lower levels in more local government or local representation, you saw people voting just because they might have been voting out of fear, not wanting the other candidate to get in, not wanting to waste their vote. You hear that a lot. And not wanting to, I think there's something inherently human, I guess, about wanting to be part of a winning team. So there's some competitive factor there that people want to vote for a winner. And I think that plays into it as well, I think, with not voting for some of the third-party candidates and stuff. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's really like there aren't very many opportunities that we have when like we think of all the time when like politicians, like they just kind of seem to ignore us all the time, and in a lot of cases they can get away with it. But one case where they absolutely have to listen to us is when we vote. They can't ignore that. If the vote doesn't go their way, they have to leave, and that seat gets replaced by someone else. And so it's weird that we have this opportunity, and yet we're not able to leverage it properly. Like there's this one opportunity that we really get where they can't ignore us, and we're not able to leverage that. So like either we aren't as aggressive as we want to be with our vote, and we actually provide a message that is contrary to what we actually think, or even if we're voting genuinely, the vote that we're able to provide doesn't really provide the information that we want to carry into it. Right. And we're given this tool, which is really inadequate. So we're given the vote, which is wonderful and what we need, but the manner in which we vote is not very good at all. And so like that's really what it's coming down to.
Yeah, and it seems like even I know I have a ton of friends that are anarchists, and they believe that the voting for politician side, especially a lot of folks that I know go to vote just for ballot measures. Some of the point because they feel like their vote is not being counted as it should be, I guess, in the actual candidate election, because again, it feels like the wasted vote, or it feels like just an underrepresented group. When if you, like you were saying, if you talk to friends and other folks that are voting a particular way, or for a particular candidate, let's say, they feel very strongly about something, whether it be like anti-war or legalization of cannabis, or one of the big kind of topics right now, or criminal justice reform, and they're voting for candidates that are, like you said, absolutely opposed to it, and it really drives people to voting for mainly just the ballot measures and simple yes no vote, and really pushing for that. But I think alternative voting methods that are popping up, I think would really help bring a lot of those people back into voting for candidates and feeling more like their vote is being counted towards it. So no, it's interesting, and I don't know a ton about the approval voting, so I'd love to break into that and give a quick kind of, and I have read a little bit before the episode. I wanted to make sure I did know a little bit, but for the viewers who don't know and people listening, can you give us a quick overview of kind of what that would look like with, say, 4 different candidates in this next election, let's say?
Sure. And maybe also helpful to kind of contrast it with what we do now. Mm-hmm. So right now we have a completely inadequate way of voting, which forces us to choose only one candidate, no matter how many candidates run. And here we're talking about single winner elections, where like you're elected like mayor or something like that. Right. But regardless of how many candidates run, you can only choose one candidate, which is a bummer, because like if you like more than one candidate, like you're out of luck. If there's that one candidate who really speaks to you, but it doesn't seem like they're as viable, but you really want their message to get out, well, like now you're in a dilemma. Like, do you support that candidate, or do you go with one of the front runners who's more likely to win? And so like that's the dilemma that we're stuck with, is forcing us to choose just one. What approval voting does is it says like you don't have to limit your voice. it gives you that same ballot, and it says you can vote for more than one if you want. You can still choose one if that is what works for you for this particular election. But you have the option, and everyone else has the option to choose more than one candidate if it makes sense for you in this election. So if you have that other candidate who they're really speaking to you on a particular issue, maybe like you're really big into public transit or another local issue that's affecting your mayoral race, but there's also like this kind of, you have some more establishment candidates that are more likely to win. Well, you may hedge your bets and say, okay, well, I can look at those front runners, but at the same time, I really want to make sure that these new ideas are able to get play out there and that these candidates aren't ignored, because that's what happens. Like if you have this current choose one method that we have now, and those candidates aren't able to get support, they're going to get marginalized,
right,
and they can be ignored. Whereas with approval voting, you select as many candidates as you want. Still, most votes wins. It does a wonderful job of getting a nice consensus candidate as the winner. But on top of that, you get all this accurate reflection of support for all these new ideas. And the other thing too is, even with the winner under approval voting, even if the winner doesn't change, it's important that the winner be able to have a mandate reflected if a mandate is there,
right,
because we're in really trying times now. We have all kinds of challenges that our cities and states take on. And if you have a candidate, even if it's the right winner, even if that candidate is winning with, say, like 35% support because of vote splitting of so many candidates,
right.
How do you lead with that? Like, how do you, where is your mandate to take on aggressive policy? Whereas with approval voting, if you have a mandate, that can be reflected. And it's going to be really important to be able to push those policies that they need.
Right. And to your point too, like if you have other candidates that are falling in second and third that may not have been well represented, if you only had, one pick, I guess, one selection, you're actually able to help push policy as well in maybe a direction. So say, someone wins at the top that's a fairly common, a kind of establishment politician right now, but then right below it is someone that was very radical on, say, a public transit or something like that. That you can use that in that data, and hopefully, I mean, the hope is that you see politicians recognize that and realize that that is an important part of their constituency, that they need to help support that one issue that candidate ran on, and really help push for some of these more, I guess, radical issues or radical stances on typical issues that we see. We say, in a lot of the third party races, we say there's more to winning than winning the race. You can win in policy. You can really push part of your campaign, say, is legalizing marijuana or decriminalizing sex work or something like that. If you fall second or third, with that being your main kind of stance, and having someone win, they're going to look at that and say, hey, this is still at something that's important to the group of people voting for me. I should at least look into this and figure out what I can do about this in order to secure those votes maybe for next time as well. So I think it helps really push some of these other issue, single issue candidates as well, and things that might want to be pushed as far as policy and giving policy mandates, like you said, with a much higher percentage of voice being heard instead of 30-ish% of the vote, because it split so much. No, I really agree, and I think there's some serious truth to that.
Yeah, and I think third parties in particular are really cognizant of, I mean, they have a history there of having their ideas co-opted by major parties, so they're not naive to that idea, and so it's really recognizing that it's more about it's not just about who wins. Obviously, that's important because the person who wins guides the policy, but
Yep.
the person who wins is also shaped by the environment in which the campaign takes place. And so if you get someone who has like 30-40% support, and they're saying like, hey, like this is really important. And particularly if the winner goes back and looks at the election data and says like, hey, like there are a lot of people that supported that other candidate who also supported me. So it's clear that there's a constituency that supports me that I would also benefit from bringing up this idea. And even if some of the ideas are maybe disparate, like they could still increase the base that supports them as well.
Right. Yeah, and especially, I mean, if you look, at someone that's running more for a first time versus an incumbent, and being able to break through, you can use the data to go against the incumbent. You could even go back and look at some of the historical data and see, these, the second and third place candidates supported these things, and the incumbent still doesn't support those things. If I take that policy position, I can really grab those voters. I mean, I think I like data analytics as well on the back end. I helped in some of the campaigns I worked on the data analytics side, and I have friends in that space a little more hardcore than I am. But it's great to be able to take a look at that data and really understand what a voting base really wants to hear or is really passionate about. And it might be something that you're passionate about and never campaigned on because you didn't think there was anyone passionate about that. And you actually now have some data showing that. So it makes it a little more interesting, even post-election, I feel like.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree.
So I want to get into, I hadn't actually heard about this until we started talking a little bit about what we were going to be talking about today. And I looked it up and saw that St. Louis, had ran their first election with approval voting, and I wanted to hear more about that. I didn't dive too deep because I wanted to kind of hear firsthand a little bit of some of the information, but I'm very intrigued because I think a lot of the reactions that we've seen, like I have a lot of friends and family. I grew up in Maine, so I have friends and family in Maine that saw ranked choice voting and they loved it. And I think I saw, in some of the headlines that people really did appreciate the approval voting election as well in St. Louis. I don't know many people there locally, but I had seen that a lot of people liked it. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how it shaped the election and what some of the, I guess, reactions and stuff were afterwards.
Yeah, so St. Louis was really interesting and exciting. There was recently the first usage of approval voting in St. Louis. They had a nonpartisan open primary in which voters could choose as many candidates as they wanted, and then the top two would go on to the general election. Prior to approval voting within a nonpartisan open primary passing, St. Louis used a closed primary system. So, like, you'd have parties, you'd vote within your party, and then you'd vote for a single person. The candidate with the most votes would go on to the general election, and then the folks in the general election would have it out. And previously, there was a lot of vote splitting within the Democratic primary. And St. Louis, like a lot of cities, has a strong Democratic hold. They tended to be a bit more liberal with the larger city. And so St. Louis fit that mold as well. But St. Louis also has a large Black community. And so what they were finding in the previous election was there's a lot of vote splitting among the Black candidates and also among progressive voices as well. And so as a consequence, there was the winner from the previous election didn't really have a whole lot of support. And interestingly, that person, after the former mayor, once approval voting passed, right after it passed, she decided not to run again as an incumbent.
Oh, wow.
You think about the amount of momentum that an incumbent has,
right,
and the likelihood that they're going to keep their seat. But she's pretty much saw the writing on the wall that she wasn't going to be able to take advantage of vote splitting. And so as a consequence, this recent election, we saw the candidate who previously just got a fraction of the vote and had her vote split among the other members of the Black community. She, in the open primary under approval voting, had clearly above 50%, and as above 50% approval. And so she was able to go in to the general election with the second place person and really show that she had the support to be able to lead. And St. Louis faces a lot of challenges. And so it's important for her to be able to move forward in a way that shows that she has the support behind her to take on aggressive policies.
Right. No, that's super important. That's interesting, and you know, I hadn't thought a ton about that vote splitting at the closed primary level, but that happens. I mean, we talked a little bit before. I live in Massachusetts. In general, a very blue state. We have red pockets here and there, but whoever wins Democratic primaries typically win the election. Like it's you see. It's the one good thing, I guess, about it is you see a lot of people show up for the primary election, which is a good thing. But then people just kind of know who's going to win the election after that, because there's typically a lot more support for those Democratic candidates. So we do lose as well, and I've seen this happen in the past. We lose a lot of progressive voices. We lose a lot of voices that are more grassroots campaigns, because there's like 4 or 5 of them, and then the state party kind of handpicks the establishment candidate and runs one establishment candidate that's part of this, state party grooming or whatever, method. They get them in and make sure that they're getting the most support. So that is something I had never really thought about. And vote splitting at that primary level really does happen significant. I see it every year, and I just never have thought about it that way. So that's really interesting to bring up.
Yeah, and also like in closed primaries too, you get this weird phenomenon where folks within a community they actually pressure people not to run. So like like you are representing a particular, maybe like a progressive or more conservative ideology. There may be other people who genuinely like the policies that you support, and they say like, hey, there's somebody else that's kind of similar to you. If you run, you're going to split the vote with them. Like, I know like you're great and all, you show you have support for the same policies that I like, but if you run, like, it could mean a real disaster here, and none of us may get the outcome that we want. And that's to me, that's an abomination,
right?
Because the democratic process is not running its course. The people who want to use their fundamental right to be able to run for office, like, are getting coerced out of that right. And then also,
right,
their views aren't going to be identical to everyone else's. So we're still missing out on a lot of nuance in terms of policy. I mean, you see that in terms of ideology. You see that in terms of like minority groups as well,
right.
having a lot of diversity of views from those communities, and them having to worry about having their vote split and not being able to have the real diversity of voices that they have within their community being able to be represented. And so by forcing us to choose just one candidate, we're really forcing out a lot of those voices as well.
Right. And almost, almost forcing people to, and maybe not so much directly, but I feel like indirectly having people water down a lot of their message or their actual stances, because they're trying to just gather that group, whatever, in that primary, so that they're not splitting the vote. Or if they see someone with the same, policy, it almost feels like they have to combat that or do something different when they could feel, very similarly. And I feel like it would take away, and again, I don't mean to keep bringing it up. I'm just very familiar with ranked choice voting as well, but I've seen it happen in Maine during ranked choice voting. It makes candidates who do feel similarly about things say, hey, put both of us, rank one of us above the other with the ranked choice stuff, but with approval voting, just vote for both of us. We're both, going to push progressive policy or whatever it ends up being. You can almost have candidates running together at that point to gain, and it almost creates I don't want to boil it down to nicer, but like a more considerate approach to politics, instead of having people kind of go after each other during primaries and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, with our choose one method that we have now, it really encourages the worst out of our elections, like with the campaign itself. But it's interesting, like, too, like when we think about the differences that we see between other voting methods, including alternative voting methods. And so, like, maybe like taking a time to reflect and think like, okay, well, what makes a voting method good? Like, we're looking at these different options. We might look at it and say like, well, like, one, we want a strong winner, right? We want a winner who is a nice, strong, consistent candidate that really reflects the typical person in that community. And also when that person wins, if that person has a mandate, that should be reflected. But in addition to that, like we also want to make sure that we hear everyone's voice. And that's something that we keep coming back to, particularly when we're talking about independents and third parties running, and just people with new ideas, making sure that they're able to get those out in that in the limelight. But interestingly, not all voting methods are as good about being able to do that. Obviously, our choose one method is horrible at it.
Right.
But approval voting, even with its simplicity, really stands out in terms of being able to do a great job in terms of capturing the support. But we actually don't see that same thing with ranked choice voting, which, for instance, in Maine, because in Maine they were able to use ranked choice voting for the recent presidential election. But interestingly, like neither third party, neither the Libertarian Party nor the Green Party candidate, neither of them were even able to crack 2% in any of the places in Maine that would count towards an electoral vote. And so, like from my perspective, I think that's your opportunity. Like like for ranked choice voting, like this is where you can shine in terms of being able to show that third party support. But it just like was not there, and part of that is just by the kind of confusing way that ranked choice voting is calculated, and the way that it really doesn't always acknowledge a lot of the information that that voters cast on their ballot.
Yep. Yeah, and I think there's there definitely, so the one major thing we combated in Massachusetts was the education piece of it. I mean, it was just trying to get folks to understand how that vote broke down for ranked choice voting was difficult. I mean, I was a proponent of it, and I still had a difficult time, trying to make sure that people who, people did support it blindly because their favorite politician said to support it. Sure. But the people who really did want to learn about it and try to understand how their votes would be counted, and there was a lot of disinformation as well being put in by people who benefit from the single vote, the single cast vote that currently happens. But there was just a lot of people who couldn't get past kind of after the first round, if someone got knocked off, what happened to votes then? And it really was a little bit more difficult to, and that was actually when I first did some research for the show. One of the things that did catch my eye was how simple it was, approval voting, and how much easier that just going through trying to help campaign for ranked choice voting, how it might be much more easy to educate people how approval voting would work. So yeah, I think the simplicity is something that is definitely advantageous for at least to get pushed as a change to the current system to a different system. It makes it a lot easier for voters to take that step versus what I saw with some of the ranked choice voting stuff.
Yeah, and the reflection support that other candidates have. I mean, it's not like a fluke in just Maine. Like for instance, like you really see this across the board when we've done polling studies comparing different voting methods. And we're going to see more firsthand with ranked choice voting as well.
Yep.
As an example, we did a poll looking earlier on in the Democratic primary in the 2020 election. And there, like, you would see like the cluster of front runners. But if you wanted to, as you recall, like there were a ton of candidates in the Democratic primary. And so like if you were curious and said like, okay, well, like actually the candidate that really speaks to me, that candidate is not like one of the major front runners. And if you want to look down and say like, okay, well, how much support did that candidate have? And after all, that's important because that can dictate whether that candidate gets airtime, a lot of like free media attention, and make sure whether their ideas get co-opted. But when you look down under for those other candidates under say ranked choice voting or choose one system, they really get just like this tiny bit of support. As an example, a lot of folks like were clamoring for Andrew Yang, for instance, under ranked choice voting and under polling in the round before he was eliminated, he was still under 10%. Whereas under approval voting, when we did polls using approval voting, he was around 30%. So like a threefold difference. That's a huge difference when you're trying to say that you have legitimacy under your candidacy's platform. And and so it's just a huge deal when we're looking at a voting method, just to make sure that when people cast their vote, not only are they able to cast information in a meaningful way by like how they're selecting candidates, but also to make sure that the voting method itself is tallying them up in a way that actually acknowledges their vote and listens to them.
Right.
And I think that's one of the big ways that approval voting has an advantage, because not only is it simple and you're able to express your opinion, but when you tally it up at the end of the day, the voting method isn't ignoring anything. For instance, like ranked choice voting does, when some of your preferences for a candidate can be hidden down the ballot for other candidates, and it just never is reflected in the tally.
Right. Yeah. And being able to, so, I have seen, I've been trying to pour through some data, again, data driven. My day job is engineering. So I do appreciate data a ton. So I've been looking into data on some of the ranked choice voting stuff. And yeah, I think one of the things I noticed was if I think the election in 2020 might have had some very specific, things going on. I think that really drove people to feel strongly one way or another. I think there was particularly a lot of media attention to the two major parties specifically because there was such a, I guess, story or whatever there. But I do think that when you look at some of the other elections, not just the presidential election, you see when there's folks that are front runners that have similar ideas to some of the folks that are down below, you do lose that vote of the third party or the other people that are maybe not getting the airtime or not kind of one of the front runners, but they have similar ideas there, I think. And not that Andrew Yang and Joe Biden or whoever was front runners in those groups had similar ideas, but they had similar followings, I guess. Like people who probably would pick Andrew Yang as one of the front, people that they'd pick. Joe Biden probably wasn't super far down on their list. And I think there's something to be said there with commonality between folks. And again, we kind of go back to when you have two people with kind of have some of the similar policy platform, you can kind of push one of them out because, hey, if you run two, you can hurt my numbers. And if we want to get this accomplished, we should just run whoever's the most popular. So no, I think there's a lot to say there for that too. And I'd love to see some of the numbers. I think you had just shared something with me. I'm going to share it with the folks here in the comments as well. Like I said, data-driven guy. I'd love to pour through any of the data I can on trying to see how these actually impacted the election. So this is great.
Yeah, and I can share as well with you the St. Louis election results as well. Yeah, and it's interesting. So I with the ranked choice voting advocates, particularly in Maine, I tried to take some of them to task and say like, hey, like why is it that your voting method, which you push as being really great for third parties, independents, and these new ideas, why is it that it's doing such a bad job of capturing the support? And like one of the responses that I got was like, well, like it was the election was really focusing on like looking at Trump and looking at whether the Democratic Party was going to be able to take over power. And I mean, my answer to that is like, when is it not an election? When it's contentious and you have like a really kind of divided electorate, or the result is really, it's always very important. Like it's always you're always going to have that dynamic. And so what we need is a voting method that doesn't need people to make excuses for it. We need a voting method that will, in really any circumstance, make sure that support is captured, because you don't need a voting method that can only capture support during unexciting election years. It's always an exciting election year,
right?
And so you need a voting method that's reliable, that is always going to listen to you, regardless of how contentious the election is between the two frontrunners.
Right. Yeah, and even just understanding, like if you have, like we were going back again to the data, I guess if you have the data of of people who voted for multiple candidates that were the third parties and, one of those major parties, that data might get lost as well as you're going through the different rounds of, and I know there's some data that's captured there, but really people care about like end tallies and stuff. And I guess with approval voting, you get that end tally of everyone's vote for every single, the Howie Hawkins votes, like say if that dropped off first in Maine and went, if they needed more than one round, people wouldn't, I guess, notice that as quickly. They'd have to do a little digging instead of getting that as the final vote tally, or the Joe Jorgensen votes, if those kind of went off and went to Trump and Biden respectively, and maybe Howie at that point, you would lose some of that data, I guess, in the final vote tally when people looked at that, and that would change the whole narrative of the media, after that. If you had, say this last election, say if people did vote, Joe Biden with 60+%, and right below it was Donald Trump and Howie Hawkins or Joe Jorgensen or one of the third parties with like 40%, that would really push people to start talking about the third parties as well. It gives almost a better opportunity for some of that spotlight or whatever to be pushed with some of the media. Although it's, I don't want to get into a whole thing about how the media handles elections, but I think it would almost push for that story to at least have to be told.
Yeah, and the nice thing about approval voting is that it's just so simple. Like just the way that you vote is very simple. You're simply checking off as many candidates as you support. And the way that it's tallied is simple as well. You're just talking about simple addition. You're not doing any complex ballot transfers, and you just look at the percentage of ballots in which a candidate is approved on.
Right.
And you really need it to be that simple of a case as well, because the media have their own opinions about candidates as well. And you need to make the case so bold and easy that they can't ignore it. And if you have a voting method that's needlessly complex, that is confusing, it makes it harder to make that case. Whereas with approval voting, it's so simple, you just can't get around. You can't get around what the data says. It's just right there in your face.
Right. Yeah. I mean, people manipulate, very simple data to say whatever they really want to say. The more complex that data gets, the easier it is to manipulate and kind of pull the wool over folks' eyes. So yeah, no, I think there's, I probably try and stay very open-minded, and you're selling me a little bit on approval voting. This is good. I love learning, more things that I didn't know about yesterday. I'd like to learn about today, and I'm happy to hear more about this. This is great. And I think there's, I hope that states are looking at, when they're trying to push different, alternative voting methods, they are looking at the data that is coming out from some of the early adopters, I guess. But also that they're hopefully not throwing the baby out with the bathwater as well. I think I've even seen some of this in some of the social media from you guys. Approval voting is what the data that you've seen shows to be the most effective, but there are other voting methods that maybe from the data that you've seen aren't as effective, but they are still better than what we have today. So maybe some baby steps in the right direction are still a positive direction. And I just kind of want to get your take on, do you see one of these voting methods as being a positive step? If ranked choice voting passes in a state, is that still a big positive for you guys? Or is that something that you might have to combat to, say if you think, it is overly complex and people are going to not appreciate that alternative method and want to go back? Do you think it hurts the case for alternative voting methods, or do you think it helps to at least see something better than the one choice vote that we have today?
I think it's helpful to move away from the choose one method that we have now, but it's also important to note that our choose one method is so bad that literally anything other than that is going to be better than our choose one voting method. And when we're talking about something as important as our democracy, maybe we don't want to settle for the second worst. And so and and the difference in terms of like approval voting and ranked choice voting, like it's not a small difference either. Like we're talking about enormous differences in simplicity. We're seeing already large discrepancies in the degree that the approval voting is able to capture support compared to the limitations with ranked choice voting. The other issue is that there may be circumstances where ranked choice voting moving forward can displace opportunities for approval voting as well. As an example, and this is a bit of an unfortunate example, in Austin, Texas, so we have chapters across the U.S. Supporting approval voting in cities and states. And in Austin, Texas, so as a kind of a preface, in Texas, both the Secretary of State and the Attorney General have indicated that ranked choice voting is not legal under Texas law. And so, but approval voting, there are likely ways around that with approval just because it's so simple. It's very versatile in terms of how it can be implemented. And yet the city of Austin has passed a ballot initiative. So like advocates in Austin passed a ballot initiative to use ranked choice voting in Austin city elections. But because it's not legal, in Austin, they've used it basically as a placeholder to say whenever the state government who does not like ranked choice voting decides that it's okay to use ranked choice voting in their state, then it'll be implemented. And to me, when I see that, I think this is actually not very good because what it does is it really acts as a blockade to better methods. So we've got folks who are in Austin who are supportive of approval voting that are very excited about getting other stakeholders involved and making it so that Austin, as well as like Dallas, San Antonio, a number of large Texas cities to be able to implement approval voting. But if you're going through and you're creating these blockades to say like, okay, you can't use like, or taking out the political wind of being able to use other alternatives, it really makes it challenging. And you're basically saying like, okay, well, nobody gets to change what the voting method is. It's going to stay plurality voting indefinitely until the state, which has no interest in changing it at all, changes their mind about which voting methods are possible in the state. And so there is a bit of displacement that can occur in terms of opportunity. And we also don't want people to think like, okay, well, ranked choice voting has been implemented in a bunch of places. Like maybe it's kind of lukewarm in terms of its practical implications. But because it has this kind of like experience or track record, using air quotes there, maybe we want to stay with that rather than give opportunity to other methods that show much more promise, even though like they're still a bit newer in terms of their implementation.
Right. Yeah, and it's you're missing out potentially on even other voting. You know, I don't know what's coming up in the future, and there might be other voting methods that someone might present that might have a ton of data that say, hey, these are much more representative of of the group of people who are voting in a said election. Let's look there. Like you said, it does. It almost it feels like one of those hollow wins. Like you get. You want hopefully some big change to happen and some incremental change that happens and everyone celebrates that as a win, and at the end of the day it didn't really change much, but everyone feels like their work is done and they can go home because that little win was achieved. I get it. Yeah, I think there's something there to be said about making sure you pick the right one, because there is a lot of kind of motivation and kind of groundswell of activism or grassroots supporters, and that momentum can be lost very quickly if you, I guess, implement the wrong one or implement one that doesn't happen to be as directly proportionate as you'd hope.
Yeah, and I think it's also important too to recognize that. So we take a very methodical way approach to how we look at voting methods, and we look to see what candidates people actually supported and compare that to different voting methods as well as approval voting. And so when we look to see like, okay, well, this voting method did a good job, like we have kind of data to back that up. Whereas like it seems like in some cases when an alternative voting is implemented and they run the election, and they say like, okay, well, we got a winner, like we have a success. It's like, well, like, is that really a success? Because I could pull names out of a hat and like I can get you a winner,
Right.
but I don't know that I should be celebrating about it. And
Right.
so I think it's really important too that we take a more data-driven approach to evaluate these different methods and say like, okay, like was a good winner selected, like relative to what the people wanted? Did it
Right.
actually capture support of all the candidates and the voices that the people wanted to express? And then looking at the logistics, like was it something that people could understood? Because transparency within the method, particularly in a time of distrust that we have now towards some of our elections, is really important. And then like you have practical concerns too, like how much of a pain was it to implement from the government side as well, which like that can also be a big issue.
Yeah, actually trying to get volunteers, spun up and educated on the new voting method, and there's a lot of that goes behind, what the city clerks do and stuff for trying to get these elections run. Yeah, for sure. I also, I this question, and it might have nothing to do with this. I don't know if your data has shown any of this, but one of the big things that stands out to me every single year or every 4 years, especially, but every year there's a vote. Especially in the local elections, you see in some cases 10%, maybe 20% of people vote. In the national election, even you see over half of the country not even give their voice, their opinion on who should be the presumed leader of that country. Have you seen any, or have you done any polls, or is there any data out there, I guess, showing any of these alternative voting methods actually making people feel more likely to vote, like non-voters impacted, I guess, due to these?
I think it may be a little early to be able to tell with some of these questions. I think also the case with the approval voting. We did see a good turnout in St. Louis relative like to other elections that they had, and also keeping in which is particularly good, keeping in context that the election was held during a pandemic when when people couldn't vote by mail. But I think for this particular question, there are a lot of really important questions also that should be answered, and I think taking a data-driven approach to that is the right way to do it.
For sure. Yeah, and I'd love to hear more and read more about it. I'm definitely going to continue to look for articles that you guys write and different data sets that are available and stuff. I think there's like you said there. I think I'm very focused on data-driven approaches because that's how I like to live. I mean, I make daily decisions based on data instead of emotions as best I can. And I think it's going to take a lot to get the general population. I think a lot of people vote emotionally, and I think a lot of people, but I think this could help, I guess, present a more appropriate outcome, I guess, based on the even if someone does vote with their emotions and wants an emotional candidate to win, it would at least be more representative of the people that want to. And I'd be interested as well, just as another data set potential, I guess, for the future, is how if like say a place has approval voting, how likely is that winner to actually have a good approval rating once they get into office? And I know we haven't run enough elections at this point to see something like that, but it would be interesting to see based on if we have a lot of local cities and stuff start adopting some of these alternative voting methods, comparing the data, I guess, between what their approval rating is before and after, with plurality voting, with a ranked choice in Maine and St. Louis with approval voting. It'd be really interesting to see kind of how people feel post-election, because I think that does represent a little bit. I mean, there's also candidates that come in. I don't want to go too far, but there's candidates that come in and say one thing and do another. Obviously, that would skew some of that data. But if you had a big enough data set, I feel like you get at least a good understanding on whether or not it did actually represent, a good portion of that group.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and like as you're explaining, this is the type of hypothesis where it takes more data points to be able to really answer the question. But these are still the types of questions that are appropriate to ask. But it does require many more cities and states moving away from this terrible choose one method that we have now.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we're coming up on time. I could talk forever. I really like this. I like the approach. I like, I have read through some of the methodologies as well on the website. I want to give you, I like to give guests at the end kind of a little bit of time to just, as a thank you for coming on the show, kind of hype whatever you want to, if you have anything in particular that you'd like to talk about, or just kind of what you would like to leave us with.
So this isn't something that I would ask people to be passive about. There are a number of ways that you can get involved. We have chapters across the U.S. And in states, again, like across the country. And if you go to our website, you can stay involved. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can go into the Take Action section of our website at electionscience.org. And when you're on electionscience.org, you can go to Take Action and then join a chapter. That's an easy way to get involved. And of course, you can also donate to make sure that we're able to support the chapters and campaigns to make sure that other people are able to really, like I said, you don't get very many opportunities where the people in power are forced to listen to you other than when you vote. Right. So we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to make sure that you are not ignored. And a great way to do that is to donate to this cause and to get involved with chapters across the country so that you have a ballot that really matters when you cast your vote. And so we care about you, we care about your voice, and we want you to be heard. So.
Oh, that's great. And I think, you definitely opened my eyes to a lot of arguments I hadn't heard in the past. And I'm definitely going to pour through some more of the data. Thank you for sharing those pieces in the comments here. And definitely, we'll stay in touch. Share anything. I have a post-political community Facebook group where folks share anything. There's a bunch of folks that are in the Green Party and People's Party and Libertarian Party, Democrats, Republicans, all sharing different things on just trying to build a better world and trying to better represent the people that are actually in these communities that are being completely misrepresented by plurality voting methods today. So if you have anything like that, please feel free to send it to me and I'll post it in our groups. Or join the groups and post it yourself. I approve, 99% of the stuff that people post in there. So thank you again for coming on and talking with us. I really appreciate it. And I hope, I hope to talk with you more. And like I said, I have season 2 coming up. So as we get more data, it'd be great to see some of that data and talk more in next season.
Excellent. Yeah. And we were actually in the process right now of hiring a director of applied data and research. So there will only be more as we move forward.
That's great. No, that's great to hear. Well, thank you. Thank you again. This was great. I really appreciate having you on and all the information that you shared with us. And like I said, definitely keep in touch. I'd love to talk more and definitely see more data come out. I think it's really important. And like you said, I don't think people should take this passively. I think people should be very actively wanting to change how our votes are counted and how people's voices are being heard. So I appreciate the work you do. And thank you again for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Nick.
Yeah. Have a great night. So that was Aaron Hamlin from the Center of Election Science. I put the link in the comments for folks to check out their website and a couple of links for the St. Louis election, and then just some of the data and the comparison between other voting methods. So please check them out. That was really great. I really learned a lot more than I even expected. I knew about some other alternative voting methods, but I hadn't learned as much about approval voting, and I'm definitely intrigued more. I want to learn a little bit more, and I'm going to do some digging on my own as well. And if anyone has any questions about it, please reach out. You can reach out to myself, or I know Aaron's contact information. There's some other contact information right on their website, so please check it out. And I'm very willing to pass on any questions that folks have from myself as well. So yeah, that was the last episode of the season. I want to thank every single person that came on the show individually, but that would take a ton of time. So thank you all. We had some incredible guests this season. We were able to talk to people from a ton of different political ideologies, some people who are non-political and doing mutual aid, direct action programs in their local communities. We're going to be focusing a lot on that next season. I'm hoping to actually do a few things in the off season, I guess, to shed some light and actually give some resources to the folks in doing mutual aid and direct action programs. So please check those out. Again, if you can check out the site in the next couple of weeks, postpoliticalpodcast.com/shop. If you buy any of those 2 promo items, 100% of the proceeds goes to each of those mutual aid groups. So please check those out last couple of days to purchase that gear. And then it'll be off the site. We might do something different with those same folks next year, or next season, but those will be the only time that you can get those specific items. So check them out. Thank you all for joining me again for this season. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please let me know if there was something you particularly liked or didn't particularly like, and I will try and take notes for next year or next season to do a little bit better and bring on some more people. So I look forward to talking to you all next season on the Post Political Podcast. Thank you.